Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm bringing back a former meta titan from Ultra League seasons past that just got a pretty big buff this season, Shadow Swampert. Shadow Swampert used to be the scourge of the Ultra League, an undeniable top 3 Pokemon, but time and nerfs really made it fall out of usage. However, with it getting its pacing back courtesy of the Mudshot buff, I'm wondering, can Shadow Swampert once again terrorize the Ultra League? For today's team, I'm pairing it up with Shadow Ampharos as the save switch, and my newly built Rank 2 Ultra League Fortress as the closer. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1, we pick up a pretty okay lead, Shadow Swampert into Shadow Impoleon. I'm going to farm up 4 Mudshots, switch into the Shadow Ampharos, and get a catch and sneak of an entire Volt Switch. My opponent sends in Florges to the Ampharos, so they clearly do not have a good answer to Volt Switch, and that should bode well for my Fortress in the back. I'm able to land the Trailblaze, ramping up my attack, and I'm already pretty close to a boosted Brutal Swing, and that's going to force my opponent to take the knockout with Chilling Water. And now I can send in the Fortress. Fortress ends up being an incredibly good core pairing for Shadow Swampert, because Fortress does a really nice job of shutting down the flyers that Swampert doesn't want to see. This team as a whole is very weak to Virizion, but honestly a lot of my Ultra League teams are. I feel that Virizion is a pretty safe Pokemon to disrespect, and throughout the course of these battles, I was actually able to defeat some Virizion despite being triple weak to it. I'm able to take the knockout onto Florges, my opponent sends in the Impoleon, I send in the Swampert, and they reveal their final Pokemon as Galarian Moltres. My Shadow Swampert is absolutely loaded on energy, so this is about to be fun. I'm very close to 2 more Hydro Cannons here. I fire off the Hydro, Moltres puts up the shield, and I still have 2 shields to hide behind, so I'm more than happy to shield here. The next Hydro will not secure the knockout, but what it should do is basically put them into Volt Switch farm down range. My switch timer should be up, so I switch in the Fortress, and it's a simultaneous switch, Fortress into the Impoleon. So my opponent read my play, but Fortress is just so strong into their team. They were triple weak to the Fortress. They had a Florges, they had Impoleon, and a Galarian Moltres, so we're going to be able to close out this game pretty comfortably. Back in comes the Moltres, I'm firing off the Sand Tomb. Realistically, I could have just Volt Switched down here. My opponent stops tapping as they know there is no longer a win con, and that's a good game. Hopping into game number 2, picking up a pretty cool lead from the opponent, Shadow Swampert into Charizard. Now this really makes me think back to the peak days of the Ultra League Premier Cup, where Swampert and Charizard were the main meta threats. I save switch into Ampharos, and my opponent is going to respond with a Virizion. Now this is the problem Pokemon for this team. Virizion has winning matchups into every single team member. Unfortunately, Virizion would outpace me if I tried to throw on good timing, which is 2 Volt Switches in the move, so I'm going to end up throwing on some very unfortunate timing of 1 Volt Switch in the move, just to ensure that I can get some damage. Double Trailblaze does get the Virizion low, and the threat of a double boosted Brutal Swing knocking them out will force them to throw energy. Even though Fortress doesn't have a great matchup in the Virizion, it would be a pretty effective damage sponge, so my opponent is forced to pivot out and reveal their final Pokemon as Impoleon. Impoleon lands the Hydro Cannon that does do some pretty sizable damage onto the Fortress, but notably, it's not going to be enough to pick up the 2-hit KO. I'm able to get this Impoleon very, very low with the Volt Switches, and now I'm just saving 2 shields for Shadow Swampert. In comes Swampert, able to get the Mudshot down, and now I have a very healthy energy head start. And I'm going to need it because my opponent still has a Virizion with a charge stack loaded. So I put up the shield as they go for Leaf Blade. I'm going to farm up and CMP tie them on their second Leaf Blade. This is a very safe Hydro Cannon because Hydro Cannon will knock out the Virizion, and it obviously would be very threatening onto the Charizard as well. Air Cutter will not cut it, my opponent will need the Blast Burn, and the good news for me is that I do have a Rock Tomb loaded on the Fortress. So my guaranteed win condition is to farm up to the Hydro Cannon, switch, and then go for the Snipe. There, I actually ended up accidentally over-tapping and triggering the Volt Switch when I meant to click the Rock Tomb, but either way, it's still going to work out because my opponent does not have the Air Cutter plus Blast Burn. So very favorable lead for me. Virizion obviously we're triple weak to, but with teamwork we're able to claw our way back and win the game. Picking up a very bad lead in the next match, Shadow Swampert into Jellicent. But this team has 2 very strong Jellicent counters in the back. My opponent does not fire off their Shadow Ball right away, which in my eyes is a pretty big surprise. They had an opportunity to throw that charge stack on perfect timing, and instead, they ended up over-farming and they let me force a shield. They bait with a Surf, they send in Florges, and at this point, I'm feeling very good about this game. My Ampharos is already boosted. I'm able to inflict devastating damage onto that Florges, and I know I'm not in a range where Trailblaze or Chilling Water will secure the knockout. So I can very comfortably no shield, fire off this Brutal Swing, and even though they've debuffed me once, I'm still at +1 attack, and the +1 Brutal Swing takes the knockout. In the back is Clefable. Clefable does not get the farm down. The 0-15-15 Shadow Ampharos hangs on, lands the Trailblaze, and from here, this game is over. Shadow Swampert didn't really have to do much in this game. This game was the Ampharos show. Moonblast lands, I send in the Fortress, opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. Great lead in the next match, Shadow Swampert into Fortress, but this is the one Bug Bite Fortress in the Ultra League. That is very, very unfortunate, and what's also unfortunate is my opponent makes an amazing catch. They're able to catch that Hydro Cannon onto the Shadow Feraligatr. The good news for me, however, is the fact that I can just send an Ampharos, shield once, and fully Volt Switch down. The reason why I wanted to preserve HP on the Ampharos is, even though my opponent is on Bug Bite and they have stored energy, I know that it's going to be annoying to remove the Ampharos from the field. So I'm going to be able to get some very good damage onto this Fortress. Fortress tries to CMP time me there, but I'm more than happy just to take the free Volt Switch, because Sand Tomb, while it does hit for super effective, does not threaten a KO. So I fire off the Brutal Swing, I pivot into my Fortress, and my opponent reveals their final Pokemon is Galarian Moltres. So they are very, very weak to Electric in the back. Rock Tomb is going to be shielded up by the Galarian Moltres, but now they're in -1 attack, meaning that I just simply do not care whatever they throw. They go for the fly, Fortress tanks that so comfortably, and from here, I should just be able to save my final shield for the Shadow Swampert and close out the game. These Volt Switches are shredding through the Moltres. Moltres, they're in -2. They have no fast move pressure to speak of. They're forced to fly to take the knockout. In comes Swampert, and I am just absolutely loaded on energy. I'm already almost up to back-to-back Hydros. Hydro is going to land, getting the Fortress very low. Fortress is going to make a Sand Tomb, but I can very comfortably shield, and with this quick pacing on the Swampert, I can just farm up to the back-to-back Hydro Cannons. Mudshot really does not do a lot of fast move damage, so the farm down wasn't going to happen, but with back-to-back Hydros, this game will end in victory. Swampert getting its 5-4 pacing back on Hydro Cannon, it's just an absolute world of difference. We move to the next match, Shadow Swampert into an extra small Lickilicky. That Lickilicky is absolutely hilarious. This is a good matchup for the Swampert. I farm up to 10 Mudshots and fire off the Hydro Cannon. Hydro Cannon is going to connect onto Lickilicky. Lickilicky undertaps. Are they actually running Solar Beam? I don't believe it. I no shield. It's a Hyper Beam. That is terrible. I save switch into the Ampharos, and my opponent responds with the Shadow Feraligatr. That is a very fortunate simultaneous swap for me, but man, Hyper Beam on Lickilicky, I was not prepared. My Shadow Swampert survived, but I lost so much HP. My opponent shielding up the Trailblaze does make me think that they are weak to a boosted Ampharos in the back, so I'm going to be double shielding it. This way I exit with a ton of energy, as back in comes that Lickilicky. I'm very curious as to what Lickilicky's second charge move is. We've already seen the Hyper Beam. They will put up the shield. I try for the Trailblaze, but I don't get there. I should have just fired off the Brutal Swing. It turns out they are Shadow Ball plus Hyper Beam. In comes Fortress, looking for the Volt Switch farm down. My opponent will make a Shadow Ball before I'm able to do so, but after that, I should be able to get this farm down and exit with a ton of energy. In the back is a shiny Dondozo. Oh my goodness. That has to be one of the best shinies in the game in my eyes. That is such a cool shiny. Dondozo somehow is still taking no damage even though my Volt Switches are super effective. That is the power of Dondozo's stat product. Dondozo's stat product is just absolutely absurd. In this matchup, I'm actually going to throw one in the move to go for the Sand Tomb and then one in the move to go for the Rock Tomb. This is to ensure that I can apply a debuff to hopefully be able to take the KO with the Rock Tomb. So even though I had a Volt Switch user into a Water type, that's how strong Dondozo's stat product is that was still a pretty close matchup, but we're able to get the win. Great lead in the next match, Shadow Swampert into Runerigus. I'm expecting my opponent will try and catch on 6 here, so I'm just going to fire off the Hydro as soon as I get it. This feels like a moment where it's so obvious to throw instantly that it actually ends up being a little bit unpredictable. My opponent saves a massive amount of Runerigus energy and makes a very nice catch of the Hydro Cannon onto Lapras. But the good news for me is I can just look to rebank energy. I'm going to actually rebank 6 Mudshots worth of energy and then send in the Volt Switch Fortress. Fortress has such a commanding matchup into the Lapras. The switch timers are pretty heavily misaligned, but I'm still feeling like I'm in a pretty good spot. They're going to fire off into their Aria. I'm immediately going to be firing off the Rock Tomb before their timer comes up, but it just comes up, and unfortunately, they're able to get the catch. So I should have just thrown the Rock Tomb as soon as I got it. That is a little bit unfortunate, but now that I've debuffed them, I think that I can actually survive a Shadow Ball. They go for the Shadow Ball. That does not take the knockout. I'm able to hold on, and I'm actually perfectly okay just letting the Fortress go because I don't want to switch slot the Swampert. I bring in the Swampert, overfarm, winning charge attack priority over the Runerigus. Hydro Cannon is shielded. My opponent goes down 2 shields to 0, but I'm eventually going to have to start shielding. There's the Rock Tomb bait. They should try for a catch. There it is. They try for the catch onto Lapras, but I'm able to hold on to my energy on the Swampert and send in the Ampharos. I could have thrown the Hydro instantly and it would have just knocked them out, but I thought that's when they would try and go for the catch, so I didn't end up throwing it, and I a little bit mind gamed myself. In bad news for me, the Lapras is able to hang on and make a last-second Sparkling Aria, and that pressures away my final shield. In the back is Galarian Moltres. My boosted Volt Switches hit for super effective, but my charge attacks are walled. The good news for me is I have a ton of energy on the Swampert, but I'm going to have to manage my energy carefully. In comes the Swampert. There's the switch to Runerigus. I throw 1 Mud Shot in the move. This puts me 1 away from the Hydro Cannon. They're 1 off the fly, and Shadow Swampert wins charge attack priority. This 5-4 pacing comes in clutch once again. Down goes Moltres, and that's a good game. We pick up a pretty terrible lead in the next match, Shadow Swampert into Virizion. Now, it might seem like a bit of a weird choice to run this week to Virizion, but I do have a plan. If you're able to get some damage onto Virizion, almost every Virizion team relies on Virizion to be the Volt Switch Fortress check. So here my opponent shows great patience not letting me catch the Leaf Blade, but even if you don't catch the Leaf Blade, most of the time, their Virizion is what they need to get rid of the Volt Switch Fortress. So if you're able to get some damage on them and then send in the Fortress, then the Fortress is a pretty big problem for their backline. It looks like that theory is going to be true in this game as well, as my opponent does not have a good answer to the Fortress, and they're forced to send in Ampharos. Ampharos, Brutal Swing, really not going to cut it. It does not do a lot of damage from the non-Shadow. I go for the Rock Tomb just to apply a debuff. My opponent cannot get the farm down. I could have made a Sand Tomb, and that's going to force some energy. They take the knockout with Brutal Swing. I'm going to bring in my own Ampharos, and I will snipe them down with the Volt Switch. My opponent reveals their final Pokemon in the back is going to be a Thundershock Belly Bolt. This is definitely going to be an uphill battle, but I still feel like I have an opportunity to win this game. Ampharos being up a Volt Switch in this matchup makes this matchup so much better than it normally would be. Belly Bolt's going to boost itself up with Parabolic Charge, but I'm going to look to farm up and fire off the Trailblaze. Trailblaze is going to be getting them very, very low now. Trailblaze is going to be no shielded. I try for a catch out of the Swampert, but my opponent, they're not letting me catch a thing. Their patience is absolutely commendable. Sludge gets the shield from the Virizion. Virizion has so much loaded energy, and I will put up the shield. But I now have a Sludge as well, and my Switch Clock, while it's not up yet, in 2 more charge attacks it will be. So my Sludge and their Leaf Blade, my timer will be up, and I should have an opportunity to go for a catch. My opponent is going to throw on alignment here. I put up the shield. They should be at the back-to-back, so I pivot into the Ampharos, and I'm finally able to get a catch. But I don't know if this catch is going to help me. Can I make the Brutal Swing? I can make the Brutal Swing. Is this going to be enough to knock out? Brutal Swing, not a great move without same type attack bonus. They barely hang on. They send in Belly Bolt. Do they have the Zap Cannon? If they do, they win the game, and they do have the Zap Cannon. We made it very, very close, but my opponent not letting me get those catches, unfortunately, was just what they needed to win the game. Picking up a bad lead in the next match, Swampert into Cresselia. I like to bank energy on Swampert and then safe switch into Ampharos. My opponent responds with a Swampert, but they gave me a pretty sizable head start as the Ampharos, and up this much energy, I'm going to be able to flip this. Shadow Swampert has incredibly fast pacing, and it does beat Ampharos, but the problem is my energy advantage. Now I'm going to be able to farm up to a Trailblaze plus a Brutal Swing double up. Ampharos wins charge attack priority over the Swampert, and a +2 Brutal Swing after I boost myself up again is going to be able to take the knockout. So I fire off the Trailblaze, go for the Brutal Swing. My opponent catches onto Cresselia. They save the Swampert, but that's going to hurt. Cresselia takes big damage. Now it's my turn to go for a catch as I send in the Fortress. Fortress is a brick wall to Cresselia energy. It doesn't matter what Cresselia throws, Fortress is able to tank it effortlessly, and I'm going to look to farm up a massive amount of energy before I ever fire off the Rock Tomb. I know that Cresselia is not going to get knocked out here by the Rock Tomb. This is a moment where the Rock Tomb nerf will a little bit betray me. Cresselia able to hang on in the back. That's a Pokemon I haven't thought about in a very long time. The final Pokemon is revealed to be Registeel. If XL Registeel has one thing going for it in the Ultra League, it is its absolutely insane bulk. Even back-to-back Sand Tombs are not going to put it into the yellow HP. Ready Steel fires off energy. I should now have the energy for the Sand Tomb loaded. Focus Blast does not take me out. I pivot into the Swampert, and at this point, this game is over. As long as I can land a Hydro Cannon on their Swampert, I have the Sand Tomb banked, and that will be enough to KO the Cresselia. My opponent's going to be waiting down the timer. I'm looking at the top right to see what they bring in. Their Swampert wins charge attack priority over mine, but Hydro will simply fail to take the knockout, and landing this move will secure the win. Even if Cresselia is able to KO the Swampert, they just can't beat the Fortress in the back. Back in comes Cresselia, and Swampert's going to be winning charge attack priority. Man, it feels so good to have this pacing back on Shadow Swampert. You're just spamming out Hydro Cannons left, right, and center. And with that, we're able to get the win. And now some final thoughts on Shadow Swampert and its place in this newly updated Ultra League meta. I do think that the buff to Mudshot is a pretty massive improvement for Swampert. Even though being straight 5 in terms of Mudshots to Hydro Cannon isn't bad, Swampert really didn't overwhelm Pokemon like it used to. The 5-4 pacing, 10 turns, 8 turns alternating is part of what made Swampert feel basically unbeatable in neutral scenarios in seasons past, just because it was simply faster than everything else. And I think getting that 5-4 pacing back is a really big get for Shadow Swampert. I do think that Shadow Swampert, currently in the Open Ultra League, I would rank it as a strong anti-meta Pokemon. It does very well into Pokemon like Volt Switch Fortress, you have Sludge coverage for the many fairies, and there's a lot of teams that are really disrespecting ground. I mean, take a look at my backline. My backline is very, very weak to Swampert, just because Pokemon like Gastrodon and Stunfisk have gotten nerfed, so there's not really a significant ground presence in the meta. And that's part of what can let Swampert thrive, is if people think that they can team build weak to that typing, Swampert can kind of help fill that void. I do think that because the power level in the Ultra League is so high, that Swampert, it's probably more of a strong anti-meta pick rather than breaking into the top meta itself. I think the top meta is pretty well established. You have the Flyers, the Galarian Moltres, the Corviknight of the world, you have the Waters, Lapras, Jellicent, Impoleon, and you end up having Pokemon like Volt Switch Fortress that basically beats that entire list, and that's part of why Volt Switch Fortress is now the best Pokemon in the Ultra League. But I think Swampert, it definitely has a place, and I think a well-played Swampert can absolutely get wins and be a part of a staple leaderboards pushing team in this season. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video and a little trip down memory lane for the Shadow Swampert enjoyers from seasons past, please do leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not. And an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support guys provided to the channel is so sincerely appreciated. Thank you guys so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.